Good evening, everybody. Are we on? Are we on now? Now you can hear me. That's a good thing. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tom Morgan, and I'm delighted that you're here as usual. This is our fourth and unfortunately the last lecture in our series about the future of food. For my part, it's been a very enlightening and inspiring thing to be a part of, and I thank you for your continued support. This is not the end of the lectures. This is just the end of the lectures on food. Next year, the theme will be the future of capitalism, and I think that's something that we're all interested in these days, more so than I ever thought when I was planning this. But so that's next year's activity. If you want to be on our mailing list and you're not, we have an opportunity for you to sign up in the lobby after the lecture, and you'll get additional information about future lectures. Another wrinkle that we started this year that's been quite successful so far, and that is a talkback session after every lecture where interested people get together at a place off campus and chat in a kind of directed conversation about what they heard. And this year's talkback session is going to be held at Holy Family Catholic Church in the West End, 2430 West 3rd Street. You all have, I think, flyers on that. And the leader of the conversation will be Bob Hoffman, Assistant Professor of Economics here at St. Scholastica. So that's the talkback session on Monday of next week, 7 p.m., Holy Family Catholic Church. This entire venture, of course, wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, and so let me acknowledge them again, as I always do, and I'm delighted to do. Of course, the Alworth family, who gives us the name, the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice. Also, we've gotten substantial support from the Lee and Rose Warner Foundation, the A.H. Zeppa Family Foundation, the Global Awareness Fund of the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation, Whole Foods Co-op of Duluth, and Reader Weekly. Also, special support from the DeWitt and Carolyn Van Evera Foundation and from Mary C. Van Evera in memory of William P. Van Evera, former trustee of the college. Our speaker this evening is a researcher, an author, an independent publisher who has concentrated his efforts for some 20 years on issues related to farming, the environment, and design. He's the author of numerous articles, essays, and books, many of which will be available in our lobby after the talk. He's been a guest on hundreds of national and regional radio and television programs. He's testified before Congress, and he's spoken at numerous conferences, corporate and government offices, and of course, at college campuses. Mr. Imhoff is the president and co-founder of Watershed Media, a nonprofit publishing house based in Healdsburg, California. He's also the president and co-founder of the Wild Farm Alliance. That's a 7-year-old national organization that works to promote agricultural systems that support and accommodate wild nature. For 10 years, he's been the co-host of a monthly farm and garden radio show in Mendocino County Public Broadcasting with his longtime friend, apple farmer Tim Bates. Between 1990 and 1950, Mr. Imhoff worked at Esprit International, where he was communications director for a team working in environmental product design. He received a BA in international relations from Allegheny College and an MA in international affairs from the Maxwell School of Public Affairs at Syracuse University. He lives with his wife Quincy and their 2 children, Gardner 14 and Willa 11. They divide their time between Healdsburg and a small homestead farm in California's Anderson Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Daniel Imhoff.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yep, good. I'm honored to be part of your lecture series on food and farming, the future of food. I can't say enough about all I've heard about it and wish I'd been here for the other three speakers. It's great to be here in the birthplace of one of my musical heroes. And it's nice to see that you have such high standards on vetting your speakers. Thank you for having me. I like Minnesota. I'm the first to admit that the Farm Bill and farm policy are not the sexiest issues on the planet. And so I have some slides here to hopefully keep you engaged as we talk about policy. I'm also the first to admit that I'm still learning about the Farm Bill every day. I'm still catching up with decades of past programs, things that are ongoing on a daily basis in Washington. It's a huge mountain to climb. And I'm very well aware that there are probably people in the audience who know a lot more about the Farm Bill than I might. And I do honor the collective wisdom in our room to solve problems facing us and to work through our policy for a collective good. I can tell you a few things that I do know. I strongly believe that food and farming can and should be one of the most energizing and positive issues of our time. First of all, it has to be. Too many scientific panels are telling us that our current production methods are unsustainable, that agriculture has become the leading contributor to climate change, biodiversity loss, that without a course correction, we risk being able to grant to our children and their children healthy and sufficient resources of soil and water, which are the very fundamental building blocks of agriculture. Creating a healthy food system will not be easy. It will require all of us in our towns and our colleges and schools and homes and places of work tuning into our food choices more than ever before and voting with our forks, if you will. But it will also require change in government policy through the Farm Bill recently passed in May of 2008, and its sister legislation, the Child Nutrition Act, which is up for reauthorization this fall. And this funds the school lunch program, as well as women's, infants, and children nutrition assistance and other programs, other food programs. The Farm Bill is a complex jumble of programs that date back to the 1930s. It's an alphabet soup of acronyms and a maze of mathematical formulas. But it also is a most important intervention point in the food and farming system, as its policies set a chain reaction of events in motion across our landscape, in our supermarkets and schools, in our farm fields and wildlands, in communities here and around the world. Before we start with some slides, I would like to make a few caveats. We are living in extraordinary times of change. And what I may say tonight may be easily overridden by events in Washington. And it's change that we haven't seen in many decades. And when I was working on Food Fight, the numbers, 90 billion, 70 billion, $80 billion per year seemed like a lot of money to put into the food system. But now that we're talking about $3.5 trillion budgets, suddenly the game is shifting very quickly. It doesn't make it any less important. And if I don't say enough about the positive things that the Farm Bill does, then perhaps we can address them in our question and answer period. And finally, while I'm trying to keep up with the Farm Bill right now, and the rules for the 2008 Farm Bill are supposed to be released very soon, imminently actually, I'm also deeply immersed in another book project that I've been working on for the past year. So please bear with me as I find my way through this book. It came about, I attended a conference in Davis, California in the summer of 2006. And it was an all-day long affair with all different kinds of people, bureaucrats, scholars, professors, activists, talking about all the different impacts of the Farm Bill. I was mostly aware of the good that the Farm Bill does with conservation across the country, with providing conservation assistance to save wetlands and grasslands and help farmers actually create a wildlife habitat in agricultural areas. And I had no idea of just all the different impacts on trade, on local communities, on our environment, our health, that the Farm Bill actually touches. At the same time, I realized that it was very difficult language. It was almost impenetrable listening to 8 hours of wonks talk about the Farm Bill, and that maybe what somebody really needed to do was translate this to the American public in hopes that we could begin to somehow take our farm policy back and our food policy back. So I asked a longtime collaborator, Fred Kirschenman, I said, Fred, I have this idea to write this book. And, do you think it's worth it for me to spend all the time that it's going to take to influence the 2007 Farm Bill, which strung out to the 2008 Farm Bill? And he said, well, if you want to influence the 2012 Farm Bill, then you should do it. And so we started with a real simple goal, and that was make sure that people around the country start to tune into the Farm Bill as something that is important to the future of the country and the present. And I think that we accomplished that because when you look what the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said after a grueling Farm Bill renegotiation, she said that the Farm Bill used to be her least informed vote. Of all the things that she voted on, and something that she could easily trade. Now she knows more about the Farm Bill than she ever wanted to know. And that's why it's so interesting to be here tonight. The Farm Bill's already passed, and here we are still talking about it. So what is it? It's an omnibus legislation. It's actually a time every 5 to 7 years when representatives from around the country can just ladle out money. It's a $60 billion program per year for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. It's a big part of the USDA's $100 billion budget. As of now, 66% of the Farm Bill goes for nutrition and hunger programs. So it's actually a food and farm bill, if not a food, farm, and fuel and fiber program. And despite the fancy name, however, the farming part is really related to commodity crops, a very narrow group of crops that we'll get to. And what's important, why we're here, why it matters, is what the Farm Bill sets in motion. It basically has become a system that sends a lot of money and a lot of support out to very big industrial agriculture operations. And it also supports unhealthy foods. It makes the ingredients of processed foods and cattle feed a lot cheaper than healthier foods in many respects. It supports, props up a highly pollutive industrial agriculture system. It distorts international markets with export surpluses, so it not only affects our farmers here in farm country across the Midwest and California and the South, but it also affects corn farmers in Mexico and cotton farmers in Nigeria because we are creating surpluses that depress world prices. And it's important because we all pay these costs as taxpayers. It's our money, our food system. And why the Farm Bill matters is opportunity and change to reward stewards for the things that the market doesn't value, like conservation, taking care of the environment. It's also a chance to invest in a decentralized regional food system, which is increasingly props up as the direction that we need to go to become more sustainable and secure in food production is to regionalize our efforts. It's an opportunity to conduct critical research on new forms of soil fertility, pest control, energy efficiency, things that are facing us right now. to protect soil and water so that we can hand them off to our kids in good shape, and also to demonstrate global leadership. Basically, our Farm Bill is a chance to try to get things right. Where did it start? It started in the depths of the Depression, in times that are eerily a little like ours. And Franklin Roosevelt said that, I tell you frankly, this is a new and untrod path. And the unprecedented condition calls for the trial of a new means to rescue agriculture. The challenge was this, that for decades, the only way that farmers had a chance to get ahead in the market and try to compete with the increasingly industrializing world that they were living in was to plant as much crops as they could. And the problem was the more they planted, the lower the prices went. And then when they hit exceptional cyclical wet and dry periods, they ended up with catastrophic drought and catastrophic floods. I think I remember that one day in 1935, in one dust storm over Texas, the same amount of soil that was excavated from the Panama Canal was sent airborne in a single storm. So, and then combined with the economic meltdown, the basic farm economy collapsed. And the idea was a complex one. They had a great Secretary of Agriculture, very visionary, named Henry Wallace. And his idea was to try to compensate for the farmers for those things that the market did not support, to try to have farmers be paid a fair wage, but to also require them to be conservationists. And in being conservationists, put less crops in the ground, and then with hopes that it would buoy prices by lowering supply. However, this was also a time of great change. I'm thinking that this was the end of the Jeffersonian experiment in independent farmers being the backbone of the American social fabric and democratic fabric. And we found that our whole country was on the move, that tenant farmers were moving to the cities, that whole farming communities from Dust Bowl areas were moving to California. Steinbeck wrote, and the dispossessed, the migrants flowed into California, 250,000 and 300,000. Behind them, new tractors were going on the land and the tenants were being forced off. So this was a time of great social upheaval and also the end, the beginning of the end of small farming in the United States. And here's a picture from Coonville, Wisconsin. It was the first watershed where the Agriculture Administration Act sent people to help farmers have their farm systems more closely tailor the topography where the farms were taking place. And in these gullies, whole barns could fit in these gullies. This watershed had collapsed from decades of overplanting the steep slopes and not having any conservation practices in place. And early farm bills did that. There was also a hunger component. You know, one out of 3 Americans were unemployed or underemployed, and Henry Wallace made this deep connection between our farm output and the nutritional health of the country. And they bought millions of gallons of milk, both to try to raise the cost of milk, but then to distribute to the poor. They also slaughtered, I think, 1 million pregnant sows one year, again, to try to prop up the markets for meat, but also to distribute food to the needy. And this dance, this combination of farming output and nutrition was center stage in the early Farm Bill programs. You know, World War II got our country fully employed, and by the end of World War II, agriculture was changing once again, and the genie had been left out of the bottle. Once we had our early farm bills finally okayed by the Supreme Court in 1936, they became a regular feature of government, and every 5 years we began to have farm bill programs. They were constantly changing. But as you can see, in 1950, we were a country with a very diversified farm population. Our farms were smaller, 213 acres on the average, and you can imagine that they had a combination of livestock and crops to feed the livestock and other crops that they would sell regionally or even on international markets. But it was also, from between 1950 and today, we've had a great lessening of the farm population. As a matter of fact, farming is no longer even an option to select on the census. It's not an occupational statistic anymore. There's so few farmers. And the farms have gotten quite larger. And there's no doubt that our farm policies have been a big part of that. In the 1970s, Earl Butz made a famous proclamation that if you were going to continue farming, you had to either get big or get out. But that was something that had been going on for some time. Another big force in Farm Bill politics and just understanding how the Farm Bill works was that in 1960, one of the first things that President Kennedy did was to reestablish the food stamp program. He'd been on the campaign, he'd been out in West Virginia, he'd been in very, very poor communities, and he saw just incredible poverty. And in the 50s, the food stamps and the nutritional programs had kind of been left behind a bit, and he reinstated them. And over the 1960s and over the 1970s, what's called the hunger lobby, senators and congresspeople who were being asked to vote on this big agricultural spending program, they started to see the Farm Bill as an opportunity to push hunger. And so you had this camp now, you had commodity states really pushing for big agriculture, and you had other senators and congresspeople pushing for hunger assistance, and they became the two basic prongs of the every 5-year Farm Bill negotiations. And you know, the budgets just got bigger and bigger over time. Up until the 2007 Farm Bill, this is pretty much how we spent, the USDA spent $1. You can see that the biggest chunk on the far left, on your right, would be food stamps and nutrition programs, about almost 50% of spending. And then the next biggest amount on the right is commodity and foreign ag. So this goes for basically corn, cotton, wheat, rice, soybeans, milk, sugar. Then you have other things that, you know, could be deemed fairly important from a public perspective. 10% for natural resources and conservation, for food safety, just a tiny sliver. Research and development, marketing, you know, things that actually have a high social value, just taking up a very, very small percentage of the budget. The 2008 Farm Bill pie has been sliced up quite differently. Food stamp nutrition programs now account for 67% of budget. Crop subsidies, just 14%, but then there's crop insurance and conservation programs. And one thing that we can get into a little bit about conservation programs, the things that we get, we people who care about saving the environment and taking care of things for the future, protecting other species, what we find is they promise us money when the bill's negotiated, but there's always ways that the big commodity groups find a way to get their fingers into those pies that really I think should be going to us and be increased. Let's just talk about food stamps for a second. In 2005, I believe there were 35 million people who were classified as hunger, but by the end of and you can see that it's been rising quite steadily. An important thing to know about food stamps is that only about 60% of the people who are eligible actually apply because it's very difficult, or they don't want to, they're ashamed, or whatever. But we had 35 million people in 2005 who were hungry, but the Bush administration said that they were going to do away with the term hunger, and now we would call them food insecure. And that means that a household had limited or uncertain availability of food, or limited or uncertain ability to acquire food in acceptable ways, acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. There was a Washington Post article that did some research among food insecure people, and they found of their sample that 31% didn't eat for a day, 44% lost weight, 60% were hungry but didn't eat, 90% ate less than they felt they should, 96% cut the size of meals or skipped meals, maybe because they wanted to give their food to kids, could not afford to eat balanced meals, their food did not last. They were worried that the food would run out. The Farm Bill, even though it's negotiated every 5 to 7 years, it actually goes through a number of lives, and I have to redo this slide because there's actually 3 lives of every Farm Bill. Let's just talk about them for a second. The first is the reauthorization process. And how many people followed the Farm Bill negotiation this last time? Yeah. It's actually pretty fun. I recommend it. It's good sport. And there's a lot of really outstanding reporting going on. What I found just fascinating, there were some Washington Post reporters that really covered the story. And there was one story between 1996 and 2002 or something. Over $1 billion in subsidies were paid to dead people. I mean, it's unbelievable, the leaks in the system and where the money goes. And people who follow the money, I just admire them, and I take some really morbid satisfaction following it. So I recommend it. And the next one, of course, is going to be 2012. And so this is when the promises are made. This is when the deals are hashed out. Last time, in this year, the California fruits and nuts and vegetables, and folks from the Northeast, people who actually grow food that we eat, finally said, we ought to get some money too. We're growing the food that people eat, and so they came to the table, and that block of farmers is called specialty crops, right? They're specialty crops, but they're the ones that we're supposed to eat 5 servings of per day, on that food pyramid that's run by the USDA. Anyway, so the authorization process is when the bill gets written, and it takes quite some time. The House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee, they both write and pass their own bills, and then they get together in conference, and then they put together a new bill that's sent on to the president and then ultimately passed. And so the bill gets passed, but what's happening right now is the rules are being written. It's a very exciting time because actually the rules can be rewritten when during this process, and they can decide that people who were previously eligible, if they made over $1 million to get subsidies, could suddenly not be eligible anymore. So the eligibility is being determined right now, and how much is going to be spent is being determined, and the basic rules of giving money away and eligibility. And then finally, there's an appropriation process, a budgeting process. And again, the Farm Bill can be reinterpreted. The appropriators can say, you know what, we don't want to give money for that. We're going to give it for something else. And when you look at it historically, what you find is they always find a way to cut the stuff that really benefits the people. Let me just give you, and surprise, surprise, here is annual business lobbying, this is responsive politics, that nearly $100 million is going in to lobby Congress every year, whether or not we have a Farm Bill to authorize. You can see that 2002 was the last Farm Bill that we authorized, but still huge amounts of money were going in. Why? Because there's a budgeting process. Because every year they decide whether or not they're going to fund certain things, and there's a lot of money at stake. There are billions of dollars. What happened in 2002 was they passed a mandatory country of origin labeling laws on perishable foods. And the big meat packers and the big meat industry got in there, and they were able to kill the funding for that program through the appropriations, just a budget for it. Well, what did that mean? That your hamburger, at the supermarket could contain meat from 20 different countries, from Poland, Hungary, Thailand, Mexico, U.S., all different kinds of places, and they wouldn't have to tell you that. Now, if you're a small grass-fed beef producer, if you're somebody who cares about healthy foods, I think that could actually really distort your decision-making process. Another example of funding where they just don't give you the money that they promise was in the Conservation Security Program in 2002. That was the big win. That was supposed to be $10 billion given to small farmers who were finally going to reward farmers for doing the right thing, for taking care of their watersheds, for really limiting the amount of nutrients that were being applied, for energy efficiency, for fish and wildlife protection. But instead, they limited it to a very narrow number of watersheds. And they effectively thwarted the program that really was the big consolation that we got in the last Farm Bill. The good news is that in 2008, it has resurfaced as the Conservation Stewardship Program, and it is mandatory funded for $12 billion over the next 10 years, I believe. But here's what I hope we can look forward to. This is from the Obama website when he was out talking about foreign policy. He said, "It's time we stand up to those lobbyists and tell them that we're putting first. We're putting conservation of our land and water first. We're putting tougher standards for CAFOs first. And if there's going to be a hog lot in your community, then the community gets a say about where it goes." Wedge Issues, this is just to show you that, over time we've had various years where important wedges have jammed themselves into the pie and said, you know what, we want some. One of those issues has been conservation. In 1985, that was the first time that they really started to reenact some of the early conservation programs. In the past, I think, as I said, in the old days, you had to actually be engaged in conservation programs to even be eligible for subsidies, and that went away a while. And so finally there were enough duck lovers and fish lovers and wildlife lovers that also had strong ties to the farming community that said, we need to protect our wildlands within our farming regions so that we also have beauty and biodiversity in the country. And that's the kind of wedge issue that can change a farm bill. It's always interesting to just do what journalists are supposed to do, follow the money. The reason that you have a stake in following money is because government debt is our debt. right? The Farm Bill is a sliver right now of the national debt, and now it's even, it's just a tiny fine line, even though, the USDA spends $100 billion per year on food. It's decent to ask, well, where does it go? These are billions. We spend, a good $5 to $8 billion that we just send to corn, wheat, rice, cotton, and soybean farmers. And we send them, $8 billion, $5 billion a year. Whether or not they need it, it just goes out there to sort of prime the agriculture pump and get them going. A lot of it is historically related. Then we also spend, depending on what happens to market prices, we make sure that no one loses money, even though they might have overplanted or planted in places that they shouldn't. Then we also pay for conservation. And then there are other crop insurance, disaster payments, et cetera. So you can see that Farm Bill programs can cost just side almost $25 billion a year. It's always fluctuating. Where's the money go? Well, these are the top 5 subsidy recipients from '94 to 2004. And these aren't, when you see Riceland Foods, they're representing a number of different farms, so it's not a single farm, but you can see that one operation got $500 million over 10 years, the top recipient from '94 to 2004. And the second got $300 billion, also a rice producer. And the third, also a rice producer, got $140 million. So these are large sums that are going out on an annual basis. And I took this picture from the USDA website while the Farm Bill was being negotiated in 2007. And it was a picture of farm subsidy beneficiaries in Manhattan. Okay? And the big red dots represent individuals getting over $250,000 a year. So the USDA is upset about where this money is going, right? They're putting this on their official website. Top program recipients in 2007, you can see corn gets the most, though it's distributed by quite a few growers. The number of recipients is in the middle, and the actual dollar amounts are on the side, on the far right. Wheat gets second, cotton, soybeans, and rice. The thing to know about 2007 is that cotton farmers instead of rice farmers were the real high subsidy recipients. There's a website that really tracks this, follows the money very well. It's the Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, if you can remember that. And they have a very interactive site. You can learn about individual recipients, and they're always following this and making it pretty easy. Let's look at congressional districts. If you look at the top purple, that's 22 congressional districts between 1995 and 2004 got 50% of the payments. And then the darker orange got 25 districts got 20% of the payments. So that means just a very small number of our congressional districts, 47 out of 480 or something, got 70% of the payments. So you can see that geographically, the Farm Bill payments are heavily concentrated in one area where they're growing corn, cotton, wheat, rice, and soybeans. Well, they're all on the Ag Committee too. But here's another interesting map. Remember this now. This is where the districts are. And this is a map of people who have received disaster payments in 11 of the last 21 years. That's 1 out of every 2 years. And it's 1 dot per recipient. So we're obviously growing crops in areas where we shouldn't be, and we're paying people to grow them in areas where they shouldn't be. And when they fail, we're paying them anyway. It's a program for permanent disaster. Let's talk again also about how hard it is to be a little guy, a little independent operator in a system that we have. There's really good research done out of the University of Missouri on concentration of agricultural markets. And markets are considered concentrated if the share controlled by the top 4 producers exceeds 20%, and very highly concentrated if the share approaches or exceeds 50%. So if the top 4 big guys in an industry control 50%, then it's very highly concentrated, and it's very hard to get around, right? They're controlling the market. Well, look at that. 50% of the market. Beef packers control, the top 4 producers in beef packing control 85% of the market. Pork, 64, pork production, 50. You know, it goes on and on and on. Even if you went to the seed, if you go to the fertilizer, the grain, all the basic elements of our agriculture system are dominated by a small group of very huge producers. It makes it very difficult for the small guy, the independent, to find markets and to find a way in. Too few eggs and too few baskets. You know, again, I just can't stress enough. We're basically funding with our Farmville programs crops that we don't eat directly unless they're highly processed or refined. Corn, you know, half of it goes to cattle feed, another 30% goes to ethanol, a bunch goes to processed ingredients that go into reconstituted foods. Cotton we wear, but actually a huge amount of cotton we feed to cattle in the form of seed and cake. Wheat, soybeans, again, a big feed crop, and rice. So this is the easiest way that I can explain the Farm Bill. Okay, I'll try to explain the farm subsidies. So I'm just going to call it cornification because remember we saw 32% of the money goes to corn. So Congress writes the bills. They say every year we're going to give you so much in direct payments. We're going to give you loans. We're going to give you, you know, any kind of market disaster assistance, etc. And so we grow a huge amount of corn, as much corn as we possibly can, because that's really what they're incentivizing. They're not saying, we want you to take care of this acre exactly as it should be taken care of. We're saying, grow as much corn as you can, and we'll reward you for it. And the real beneficiaries are the big feedlots. And studies have shown that between over a 10-year period, big animal feeding operations received about $35 billion in cheaper feed because of subsidies, because farmers were selling it far below their cost, but the government was making it up to the tune of $35 billion to help these big feed operators who feed is one of their biggest costs. Okay, as our farms get bigger, our people leave and they go to the coast. We have people leaving farming areas. And as we're putting all this corn and saturated fats and corn oils and all kinds of sugars, corn sugars into our foods, we're becoming heavier. We're having a weight problem from our diet. As we export corn to other countries like Mexico, we send their workers on the move because they can't compete with our subsidized corn. And since we're not really growing any food that we're eating in the big corn producing areas, we're having to transport actually fresh food into the commodity growing regions. And the system itself, the farm system itself, is very leaky. It leaks phosphorus, fertilizers, manure, all kinds of waste that travel down waterways. They travel across tiled fields, the Gulf of Mexico, into the Chesapeake Bay, into these fisheries that collapse because of all the nutrients that are overpowering these fisheries. That's the effects of cornification, and the thing that I didn't include in that little graph there is that now asking our farmers to grow our fuel as well. And all the while, it damages our land. Corn is a highly erosive crop, even if we're trying to do no-till or dumb-till, as some people call it. And conservation programs were established to help to pay farmers to, have buffer strips to contour their land, and they've been successful. They've reduced erosion. You can see in 1982, we almost 4 billion tons of erosion per year, mainly from our grain production, and we reduced it to only 2 billion tons per year. Soil that when it goes away, it's just gone. But what we find now, a lot of these conservation programs, because want to grow so much ethanol, people want to get out of their contracts. Their contracts are expiring. And when corn markets go up, farmers want to plant more. They don't want to keep it in grasslands because the money's not there. They want to follow the money. Well, what we risk right now are millions of acres that the Farmville has preserved of grasslands, of marginal lands that definitely should not be plowed. They're going out of their contracts, or even the USDA is allowing farmers to just exit without a penalty. So it's quite a scary situation when we consider that we don't get to make any more soil. The soil that we have is what we have and has to be protected as such. So my question, land use planning a dirty term? Maybe not. The Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy did a study there over the Farm Bill that I thought was brilliant, and measured the change for a period, 1980-2000, and trying to say, how does the Farm Bill affect food prices? And what they found was nutritious foods, the price of fresh fruits and vegetables over that 15-year period increased 40% over that time period. The cost of high-calorie foods and fats, fatty meat and dairy over that period. Why? Because we're putting a huge amount of money into the cheap ingredients that make industrial food. And that's why when you're walking, you find that it's in fast food areas you're cheaper than you're buying when you're in the fresh and the healthy food. And of course, this food finds its way into our kids' lunches because these are the cheapest things that the food service folks can buy. And we're contributing, our farm policy is making us unhealthy. And it's even affecting our kids, with 1 out of every 3 kids, suddenly obese. Now, this is the best way I can put it economically. The costs of treating obesity and overweight diseases have been estimated at $120 billion per year. $120 billion. And even on a big year, we spend $30 billion on our farm support. So what if we found a way to take some health money and start to put it into a healthy food system to begin to get this obesity and this nutritional crisis under control? And I certainly think it is controllable. We're also using Farm Bill money to pay the polluters, to pay for big animal factory farms. They've got their kinds of pots, money for distributing manure, just to pay trucks to take it wherever it has to be taken. Reduction in property. The Union of Concerned Scientists did a study. They estimated that communities that are around these animal feeding operations, they've taken a $26 billion loss in property values. This was, of course, before the whole mortgage meltdown, just because they're impoverished. Once a CAFO moves in there, and things start to get super stinky and polluted, the value of their communities goes down. There are health costs from overuse of antibiotics, which leak into the system, and remediation from leaking manure lagoons, grain subsidies that I talked about. That gets me worse, or really irate about it when I was reading it, was the Environmental Quality Title program to help small dairies that were green to make sure that their manure didn't go in the stream, or lockwood, and the industry, the confined animal industry, to the tune of about 100 to 125 years in the lab, up to $500,000 to have their newer lagoons built for, right? To actually their pollution control them, to install their control. So we have to find, a way to talk that. CAFO life support, fecal policy. It is a fecal federal policy. It's bullshit economics, really what it is. we're getting them to comply to the Clean Air Act. We just have to stop that. And it's anti-communist. Manure ends up in our waterways. It ends up in our air. The antibiotics and the crops that we eat are uncontainable, and we shouldn't be paying for it. Global warming, the best study that I could find, and this is a little abstract, shows that basically when you're talking agriculture is tilling on its CO2 carbon into the atmosphere, what you find is conventional row release most carbon. So, of acres of corn we support are very erosive, and they're also releasing organic, less so, till, as you can see, but you really get the gains. And when it says early succession, that bar that's going down below zero, what that's saying is we're taking in carbon from the atmosphere. That is a pastured system. That's grass. That's something that's growing very quickly, like a grassland or pasture. And what this is telling us is that if we want to reduce our impact of global warming from agriculture, which is extreme, we need to change from growing crops that are releasing lots of carbon, like corn and soybeans, and start to grow grass, and to become a much more perennial agriculture. How to do that? That's the elephant in the living room, I think, really, because right now our food system is so dependent on growing feed to feed cattle in confinement. But the long-term answer for our agriculture is to go toward pastured systems. The Land Institute called together a meeting last July in Washington, D.C. that I got to sit in on. And what their idea is the Farm Bill is really thwarted because right now it's always negotiated in 5-year increments. And those 5-year increments are very politically and economically motivated, but there's no long-term view for the health of the country. And so what Wes Jackson asked, and he and Wendell Berry wrote a great editorial about this winter in the New York Times, was let's have a 50-year farm bill. A 50-year farm bill with the idea that over the next 50 years, we're going to, 5 years at a time, begin to reduce the crops that we subsidize for feed and replace that with permanent pasture. Maybe some year we start to buy combines from farmers. We start to buy fences. We start to support beginning farmers who want to, be there with the animals out on the grass and do what they have to do. But the idea is let's have a long-term view towards the perennialization of our agriculture. I'm asking here, could we see ourselves in a post-CAFO world? This is a picture of a cow with this backpack. They're trying to measure the amount of methane that the cow's producing, from belching and its tailpipe. I don't know if anybody knows this, but a recent study showed that livestock contribute more greenhouse gases than all of global transportation combined. So 18% of all global greenhouse gases, global warming gases right now, are caused by livestock. It's phenomenal. And here is the perennial system that I'm talking about. This is in the blufflands of Minnesota. And you can see, what makes the most sense for this landscape? These two pictures are taken just on farms adjacent one another. One is, a corn crop that's nicely contoured, but ultimately its nutrients are going to leak into the Mississippi. They're going to find their way into the dead zone. Actually, the cows that eat that corn are going to have a lot of trouble digesting it, and you see a natural pasture hillside there, and the cows are going to be a lot more for it, and we're going to be sequestering carbon rather than releasing it. And we're also taking care of the songbirds as an indicator of that farm's health. Here's a farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. How many people read The Omnivore's Dilemma? or how many people didn't? Okay. Well, this is Joel Salatin, and he's one of the featured farmers as Michael Pollan is finally winding down, and he's trying to narrow in on who's a sustainable farmer. And you can see here that Salatin, he's in the Shenandoah Valley. It's almost a savanna-like landscape, and he's modeling his farming system off the savanna, where the cattle and the birds kind of live in symbiosis. And so on this picture on my right, on your left, you can see some cows, right, in the far background over there near the trees. And they're about 3 days ahead of these hen mobiles, these chicken contraptions, these egg-laying chicken contraptions that he moves behind the cows. And what the chickens are doing is scarifying the manure and eating the bacteria and the bugs that might otherwise infect the cattle, and also producing and fertilizing the pasture, etc. And they're followed by these chicken tractors. Up here again on your left on the top, you see these small tractors. There's one down in the middle too, where he's got 90 broiler chickens in one of these portable tractors, and he has them stacked across the pasture. And then the sheep, the yugo, follow them. And so he's stacking these different animals as they're moving throughout this grass-pastured system. And at the time when I interviewed, he also has some pigs permanently pastured in his in the forest, and he's producing an enormous amount of food, mostly for sale within 200 miles of the farm, at an enormous net income compared to his neighbors who are, an acre on corn and soy, and Salatin over $3,000 an acre with his animal system. That includes 40,000 dozen eggs and 10 broiler chickens and numerous pigs and cattle, etc. And compare this to the way chickens are normally raised, 20 to 40,000 in a pen, basically own waste. They're lucky if they get to see the light of day. Or even on the right there, you see the futuristic genetically modified featherless chicken with a shortened beak so it can't hurt its neighbor. The world has changed. We have climate change. We have rapidly changing energy regime, nutritional diseases. We're losing our agriculture skills as our farmers get older and our young people don't want to go into farming. We're losing biodiversity. We have this economic disaster. And this brings new political realities and possibilities. Again, just to quote our president when he was on the stump, I was just reading an article in the New York Times by Michael Pollan about food and the fact that our entire agriculture system is built on cheap oil. As a consequence, our agriculture sector is creating monocultures that are vulnerable to national security threats, are now vulnerable to sky-high food prices or crashes in food prices, huge swings in commodity prices, healthcare costs, etc. Our president actually gets it, and the message is coming home. Some ideas whose time have come. Align our Farmville crop supports more closely with nutritional guidelines. It could very well be that we just need to spend more, and since we're spending trillions, hey, why not? Let's just make really good food super healthy. We'll find a way to take it from the medical budget. Fully fund, expand, and refine the conservation stewardship program. Let's actually pay our farmers for taking care of their land rather than maximizing every single last inch of soil. Establish payment caps so that we don't have Madison Avenue or Farmville recipients, or we're just not giving it to people who don't need it. Safety nets are one thing, and direct robbery is another. Strengthen community-based and regional food chains. That's where I'd like to see a lot of money go, so that even people in poor areas can eat healthy foods from farmers markets that are reasonably priced. Expand the farmland ranch protection program and help beginning farmers. This did get a good boost in the 2008 bill. Fully enforce mandatory country of origin labeling. Yes, pretty soon you're going to have to know where your meat was produced on the package. Research incentives toward reduction in farm-related global warming emissions, organic production, perennial agriculture. Just want to say one thing. There's a farm in California, and they've discovered that they were studying pollinators, and we have this pollinator crisis with our honeybees that we so depend on. And what they found out was they were studying or sunflower production, and the bumblebees, when bumblebees were present, they actually made the honeybees more productive. They created this synergetic competition. And so all I want to say in that regard is there's so much we don't know about wild nature that can accommodate our farming systems. We try to eradicate them when I think actually they can be huge benefits to farming systems. Launch a nationwide healthy school lunch program. Why not? Why not just feed our kids really well? I say no subsidization without social obligation. I'm all for spending money on food and agriculture. I think we should possibly consider spending more. It should be spent wisely, and we should get something back. I'm thinking about, what's the next big thing, like get big or get out. And I'm talking about perennialization. Let's become grass farmers. Go perennial. And then the final thing is, I think we need to take food stamps out of the Farm Bill, out of the discussion. If we could possibly do that, then we could have a much more sane conversation about land use when we're not blackmailed by taking, food away from hungry people, which is the way it works right now. There should be a labor title. There's 5 million farm laborers, farm workers in the United States. There's not a word about labor in the Farm Bill. Healthy food, I think, should be seen as the front line on a comprehensive preventive health care. And the next Farm Bill must be far more local in nature, and it starts today in your own region, trying to figure out what you want for it. I want to leave you with one thought. This is a farm on the 44th parallel, and it's in Maine. It's on the coast of Maine, and it's run by Elliot Coleman. He's one of our great horticulture geniuses. And you can see he and his wife Barbara, they're enjoying their food. Well, the slide in the upper right takes place in around August or September. The cold season crops, the lettuces, root crops, carrots, all kinds of leafy crops that can withstand cold temperatures are planted in the late summer and early fall. And then down here on the left, you can see that at a certain point in October, Elliot simply slides this greenhouse on top of that field there, and he'll cover those row crops of greens and carrots, etc., with a cover of remay. And on the coast of Maine, above Acadia Park, he's able to harvest those crops all winter long at a really high value. They're extremely nutritious and delicious and sold just nearby. And you can see moose walking between the greenhouses occasionally, and deer. And what you have there is a climate-adapted, very low-land, high-value crop where the farmer has really worked very hard to make his farming system fit the location. Here's just some resources. Obviously, if you didn't get enough, you can read Food Fight. Farmpolicy.com, for those of you who just get out of here and you say, you know what, I'm going to start to study farm policy. It's an incredible site, farmpolicy.com, and they compile all kinds of great reporting every day. And then finally the food declaration, which we can get to in the question and answers. But food declaration, I think, is going to, in the next couple years, really send Washington a message that we want a different kind of food system. So sorry I went on so long. That's my talk, and I'd love to take some questions.